welcome to another episode of Unturned Stones. Today, my guest is Dom Calvano. Dom's a longtime friend known from Winner's Edge, and he very graciously accepted to be on here today and open up with me a little bit and talk. So, Dom, if you wouldn't mind just starting out the podcast, kind of telling people a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, of course. So, like John said, I'm Dom Calvano. I'm 29 years old. Born, raised, reside in Waukesha, Wisconsin. I've known John. I've been at the gym now for almost 10 years, so about 10 years.
Yep.
In some kind of facet, I've known you that long. Super excited. On a different note, really excited to do this. I've always wanted to be on a podcast. I've tried to start a podcast on my own, so this is really exciting. But yeah, a little about myself. So like I said, 29 years old, live in Waukesha, Wisconsin. I work for myself. I own my own, I guess you could say, construction business. Primarily painting, interior remodeling, and starting to venture into more exterior stuff. Doing sales for like windows, doors, gutters, etc. So a little bit of everything, a lot of remodeling. I really enjoy doing like basement remodels, stuff like that. So yeah, I started my company full-time 3 years ago. I lost my job during COVID, and I jumped the gun and I'm like, I'm just going to do this full-time while I am laid off. So I was kind of double dipping. I'd started doing it as like a side hustle coming up on almost 10 years now that I've been painting. So it was like a long time coming. And then now here we are going into my over third year full time and coming up on a decade of painting. So that's my professional life. In my personal life, as John mentioned, I'm at the gym, and that's where I spend most of my time. If I'm not working, I'm probably here. Competitive powerlifting, I've been competing for coming up on probably 5-6 years in some kind of form. So that's something that I really enjoy. It's a real passion of mine, real hobby. And if I'm not in the gym on the weekends, you'll probably find me on the golf course. That's kind of a little bit about myself.
All right. Can you, I know a little bit about your family history. But could you kind of talk about your family history, like your parents and like where you grew up?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm born and raised in Waukesha, still reside there. Currently still live with my parents as an almost 30-year-old man. No shame in admitting it. It is what it is. I did just buy a house that shortly be moving into, but it is what it is. Yeah, so my parents are still together. They've been together for over 30 years now. I have a younger sister who just recently got engaged. She lives up in Minnesota. But no, I mean, I have a really good relationship with my parents. I'm really grateful that they've allowed me to live at home without pressuring me to get out during a time that like I needed it, because without that, I don't think I'd have been able to start my business and be able to flourish the way it has, to get me to a point where I just bought my first house, to be able to look at it, whether that's an investment or a full-time house, all these things. So without that, like, I'm very grateful for that opportunity, because I wouldn't be sitting here today doing what I'm doing without that opportunity of them allowing me to live at home.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think family is so important, and it'll happen like in American culture where I feel like if people want to move out of their parents' house and want to like disassociate from their parents so quickly, but like in every other culture outside of America, you see how much more people are very involved in their parents' lives. You know, like in Jordan, my uncles would still stop on my grandma's every single day on their way home from work, every single day after work. They say hi to their mom and then go back up to their own house. So I do think like parents being there for their kids and supporting them, it's huge. And I think there's never any way to like look down on that.
Right.
They're there to help you, and you're obviously continuing to flourish and get through. Because your 20s are a weird time for a lot of people.
Very weird time.
And that's kind of like, so much of this stuff came up for me because my 20s was such a learning period. And, I'd want to ask you I asked you to be on this podcast because during my 20s, during that time coming up, being at Winner's Edge, I'd had a lot of these deep conversations with guys, and you were somebody that when me and Kirk would talk, we'd also end up talking about mental health, and we'd kind of open up about this side of like our lives that most people never talk about. At the gym, most of the time we shoot the shit, talk about lifting, and that was it. So that's kind of why I wanted to talk to you about this, because I know you've experienced your own mental health struggles, and some of it you've learned how to conquer, and I know some of it you're still working on, because obviously mental health's never like a final journey.
For sure, yeah.
So for you, when would you say like your first, whether I guess maybe your first battle with mental health started, or your first even awareness of it?
So I guess it probably started like when I went off to college. I mean, like most people, that's a culture shock. Going from living at home and all these things, like when I was in high school, I had a pretty regimented schedule. I played competitive soccer, so it was always something going on, all this stuff. And then all of a sudden I go to college. That's not there anymore. It's like free for all. Growing up, I didn't like drink or anything, so now all of a sudden it's like partying and school and girls and all this stuff. I went to Oshkosh, like one of the biggest drinking cities in the country, and then here I am, like, whoa. So it was a big culture shock. I definitely tried to stay in front of it because they did offer free therapy at Oshkosh. So I did go to a couple sessions because it was quite a growing stage.
Right away?
Right away.
Okay.
Like probably within the first semester I seeked it out. I mean, I probably only went a handful of times, but I'm like, well, it's free. I'll take advantage of it. And I really enjoyed just like talking about it. I'm definitely an introvert, but sometimes like when I get going, I can be very extroverted and just like spill it all out. So it was a really good thing for me at the time, just going through a lot of life changes. From there, life is life. So anxiety became very prevalent in my life. For better or worse, I know I sometimes, like, when things come up like that, like, I tend to joke about it and be like, I'm just anxious and stuff. But, like, it was truly there. Tried some medication, didn't really care for it, and just kind of pushed it aside and carried on. And it wasn't until... So from that point on, I always knew that there was, like, these anxieties and these feelings and this pressure within me, and I don't want to say unhappiness, but like I knew it was like an unsettling feeling where like I knew I just wanted more and I had more. I just didn't know how to put that out there for everyone. So it's been like an on and off journey for the last 10 years, I guess you could say. And it's finally taken me to this point now, being back in therapy, getting medication, and just like learning how to really express my emotions and what I want, and being confident within myself to be like, hey, it doesn't matter. Like, these are my emotions, this is how I feel, and I'm going to say it, and I'm going to put that out to everyone, that I can finally say, like, I'm at, like, a really good place. But obviously it's a continuous journey. Like, every day I, try and read something or listen to something or try and, like, continue to grow every day, because I've started, and then I stop, and then I regress. And it's just like, okay, this is something I have to do all the time. I have to have those conversations and express those emotions, because when I don't, things kind of just...
So there's two things there. I want to come back to talk about this, which is you just described a character trait, which is you almost don't know how to not, like, you have to try to get better every day. Like, It seems like that was so natural in you that you just needed to, there was a problem and you wanted to address it. It wasn't a problem and you ignored it. But before we kind of get into that, so you said that anxiety kind of came up for you first going to college.
Yeah.
But you can say that it was a feeling that you felt. You felt that pressure, that anxiety, that kind of internal little panic that you can feel. Do you remember that starting ever in your childhood? Do you remember it in your younger years?
I can't really pinpoint it. Growing up, I was always kind of like the chubby kid, and then I was the chubby kid who played soccer. And so, like, there was always, like, a little bit of, like, name calling because of that. I was always that kid. But, like, I can never really remember being, like, that overwhelming, like, oh, my goodness. Actually, now that you say it, it's funny when I look back, when I was in kindergarten and, like, first grade, I think, I would work myself up to almost get sick every day before school. My stomach, I'd have so many stomach aches, and I'd take Pepto-Bismol every morning. I just remember doing it. And then, I mean, at the time, this was like in the 90s, early 2000s, my mom, I remember going to the doctor, and he's like, I don't know, like, it's just fine, like, get over it. Where, like, now looking back on it, it's probably like, well, maybe there was, like, a little bit of something there. But I don't think that ever really impacted anything.
Okay. Do you feel like it, you don't feel like it impacted anything?
I mean, I'm sure it did. I guess there was probably always, like, confidence and self-esteem issues, and that was probably internalized, and that was probably anxiety. But at the same time, that was a time when people, like, didn't talk about those things. And, when you're 8, 10 years old, you're just like, I don't know, maybe I'm just weird.
Do you, like, recall your self-esteem, like, whether it was fluctuating or maybe for periods it went down, and, like, you recall possibly things that happened that brought it back up? Or was it really for you, and this is just kind of me guessing, it's like when you got into powerlifting eventually, you started getting,
Well, at the time it was soccer, right? So, like, I just had an outlet. I've always had an outlet to pour myself into. So, like, I could always distract myself from everything because, like, at the time I had soccer. I was pretty good at soccer, so good enough, and it kept me not only preoccupied, but, like, it was everything. So I was always, even if I was home and I just didn't know what to do, I'd go outside and play the soccer ball, like, whatever. Where now it's like, if I don't know what to do, like, I come to the gym, I hang out and do something, stay around it, stay active with it. So, like, I guess in a way, without knowing, I found those coping mechanisms. I found ways to make myself confident. But at the time, I didn't know what I was doing.
Okay. So did soccer help your self-esteem?
For sure.
Like,
yeah.
and it sounded like maybe when you start playing soccer, you're overweight at first and
Yep.
you lost weight throughout.
Yeah.
And slowly that kind of built up. You
Yep.
got good at soccer. And
Yep. Yeah, totally. I mean, it happened that like I always was able to play on good teams, and it turned out that I played a lot, and then like would be like a captain of a team, and like these teams would be successful. So it was like, okay, like I'm actually like I must be pretty good at this because like I just keep kind of climbing the ranks of at the time of what it was, and things were going well. So it was like, okay, yeah, like I'm a little above average, I guess you could say. Maybe I'm being a little too humble about it, but I was better than most at it, you could say. So
do you remember like even like when you even like 12 or 13, maybe middle school or like really early high school? Well, I guess you probably started playing soccer.
I mean, I started playing soccer when I was like 2 years old.
Okay,
2, 3. It was my entire life.
Okay, so you've always had that like friend group
Yeah.
of like teammates. You've always been part of a team sport.
Yep.
Because I guess what I want to kind of get at with that question is, did you have a friend group outside of soccer? And do you kind of remember like, how did you like feel in that friend group? Did you feel like you were, like an equal to your friends? Do you feel like you
sure.
had to like pander to get friends' attentions? Did you always feel like you got friends' attention? Did you like was there a validation thing there with friends?
No, definitely not. And it's funny because now like when you say that and I look back, like I had my group of soccer friends, but the friends I had outside of soccer, I'm still friends with a lot of those guys. And those are friends. I have a couple friends that I've been friends with and I've known since literally the first day of first grade. I have a buddy that I still talk to. And it's like I only know my life with some of these guys, and some of those guys are still some of my closest friends to this day. So it never really felt like there had to be like some kind of validation or anything. But I always felt like we were a very like close group, but we were all very similar. Like there wasn't like one person who seemed to be like too good for anyone or like the other way. Like we were always like, it seemed like on a very level playing field. We had very similar interests. We weren't like, too girl crazy or too this or that. Like everyone was just kind of like, it just like worked out. So I've always had like a good like core of friends that even to this day, even if I don't talk to them for a while, like I could call up and like pick up, and it's, we only know our lives with each other, and we've been able to maintain that. So it's pretty cool. Not a lot of people have that.
That's great because those are friendships that really do mean a lot as the years continue to go down.
Yeah.
Do you remember what your relationship was like with your dad? Like in the younger years and the later years, was your relationship with your dad kind of always constant and the same? Do you remember like fluctuations in it?
Yeah, I mean, like from what I was told, like when I was younger, I was always like a little afraid of my dad, but it was more like he always worked really, really hard to make sure that like myself and my sister could have whatever we needed and do whatever we wanted to do. Like, I mean, for soccer, like we would travel to like Vegas and Kansas City and like fly to these places, travel. Like, I don't even want to know how much it costed because I would feel really guilty now looking back on it. But like, he always made it work, and he was always there too. So like, even if it wasn't always like vocalized, like he was always there, always, if I needed to get picked up from school, he'd come pick me up. All these things that were like, looking back on were like amazing things considering he had to work, 2 jobs, all this stuff. But like we always were able to do, like, I don't ever really remember being told like no, and not in like a spoiled way, but like I was never held back from an opportunity because of that. He just figured it out.
So would you like, obviously your dad sounds really great in the sense that he prioritized that doing things for you guys was not about just him being tired. Like he did it when he was tired. He did it when he was working his ass off, but he wanted to be there. Did you feel like would he tell you he loved you often? Did you feel like he would emotionally open up with you? Because he obviously did. Like one of the biggest things was just to show up there constantly and be there for practice. And I think that, because where I'm kind of getting at with this question is like, how do you think like some guys seek validation from men because we didn't get it from a dad in some way, to some capacity. But I think at the end of the day, most guys still at the end of the day can say, well, my dad still worked, he provided for us, and then. Some can have there's the extra level. They work to provide it, and they try to make games, and they try to go to practices.
Totally.
And how that is different than maybe a dad who was very vulnerable and open and emotionally there. Yeah. How would you say your dad was in that sense?
Yeah, I mean there wasn't a lot of that, and even within my family, no offense to anyone who's watching, we're not a hugging family. Like we go to holidays and stuff, there's not hugs. It's just kind of hey, how's it going? We chat, that kind of thing. But it's not really overly emotional I love yous, big hugs, all that stuff. That's just not really how any of our family has been.
So that's both from your dad's
both
side
sides,
and
all sides, yeah,
okay.
For sure.
So I'm assuming your mom probably still gave you that love, because I mean I've met your mom. Your mom's great. She's obviously a very loving lady.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
So she kind of gave you that enough of that probably emotional vulnerableness.
Yeah. But as a whole, there's not a whole ton of that.
So Would you say like you felt like you didn't feel like you missed anything from your parents? Or would you?
I mean, I look at it differently. I wouldn't say I missed on anything. They gave me a lot of opportunities, but like, you know, if there's one thing like I've learned through all of this, it's like, and when I say all of this, it's like self-discovery. It's just like I can take parts from them that like I really appreciate. I mean, they stayed together for 30 years of marriage. You know, they gave us everything we needed. They were always there. Like, those are amazing qualities. And at the same time, like, I'm at a weird generation where like now some of us are realizing like, hey, maybe like, you know, we talk about these kinds of things, whereas before that, like, you would never vocalize. So it's like there's a lot of good things that I can take, and then there's things that maybe like I'll take, and if I have a family someday, I can be like, hey, like, I want to do this because like I want to make sure they feel that. Whether that's right or wrong, it's just like how I look at it now. There's no resentment or hatred or like, I wish, you know, my dad would have given me a hug. Like, none of that. It's just like, learn from them and keep moving and take the parts you like and you don't like and keep moving. So
you very much probably kind of agree with that sentiment that the older you get, the more you can see your parents' side of it. You can be in your parents' shoes. And I agree. I mean, it's never a good thing to sit there and like wish your parents did anything differently, but it's good to acknowledge if there was something maybe you missed, and seeing how like you reflect on it as an adult can really change your perspective on it, because you do see like, oh yeah, your parents at the end of the day were just kids that grew up and went through their own struggles and then had to raise kids and figure shit out themselves, and it's like this big circle. But I feel like trying to talk about things to me is kind of like trying to break that circle a little bit to like have these conversations feel like they're normal and like very much a standard part of society, not something that
for sure,
you know, can't be talked about.
And it's like one of those things too, like even now, like this is why I enjoy talking about these things, because now like something just like hit me as we vocalize this. It's like I'm realizing too that like there are certain qualities in myself, like in like a relationship, that like I take from my parents too, because like I sometimes struggle to be overly affectionate with a partner, but like at the same time, like I'm always there. Like, no matter what, like, I always wanted to provide and protect and always be there. And now, like, looking back, like, those are things that were instilled in me. Like, amazing, great qualities that were instilled in me from a young age. You know, it's just now learning to grow and be like, okay, I know I can show up every day. I know I can, you know, protect and provide and all these things. And now it's like, okay, those are amazing traits, but now, like, let's take it one more. And, like, I feel like as, like, a parent, too, like, someday, like, I'd want to give my children that. But then be like, okay, but I want you to take it one more as well. Like, I know I can do like these 5 things. Like, I want you to do those 5 things great, but then like add 2 more tools to your tool belt and take it even more.
For sure. Do you kind of recall, you had touched on the fact that like you and your friend group didn't, like you guys weren't overly obsessed with one thing. You guys weren't obsessed with girls or overly obsessed with video games or anything like that. So you guys, it sounded like you guys were balanced in what you looked to do, kind of like
for sure,
what you almost filled your day-to-day life with when you were young. So do you remember back then like what you thought happiness meant, and like what you were like to what level you were chasing happiness? Because I feel like most kids to some level think that I'm going to be an adult someday and there's something I'm going to do, whether it's I'm going to become an astronaut, I'm going to be happy once I'm you know.
Not really, no. Like I to answer that question, I can't really pinpoint one thing. I mean, just growing up, like, we just did a lot of everything, whether it was, like, playing sports or, like, there was always something new that we were getting into and, like, always trying different things, whether it was, like, playing football or playing baseball one day or, like, going hiking in the woods or, like, we tried to build a go-kart one time. Like, all these things, like, we were always, I guess you could say, like, exploring and trying to find that next thing that, like, we really enjoyed. I don't know if that's really the answer you're looking for, but nothing's really coming to mind on that one, unfortunately.
Okay, well, so now in your adult life, in your late 20s, you've been through a lot, you've seen a lot, you've changed a lot, and have grown into yourself even more. Now what does happiness mean for you?
I guess that's kind of like what I'm trying to figure out.
Okay.
Because like, so for myself personally, like I haven't been one of those people who like knew what they wanted to do with their life, right? Like I wasn't like, take it for example, Kirk, who owns a gym. He started training people when he was 14 years old. His passion is lifting, all these things. It's what he wanted to do. I truly think he's one of the lucky ones who was put on this earth. He found what he was supposed to do, and he was able to do it and do it to the best of his ability. I know other people who are the same thing, right? It seems like they found their career, and it's not just a career. It's not just a job. It's like what they're passionate about, and it's what they were put here to do. I think sometimes I put too much pressure on myself because like I want to figure out what that thing is for me. So I guess like finding happiness is like an ever-evolving process for myself. And not that I'm unhappy, it's just like really trying to like hone in now, like in my late 20s, like what are like the things that I enjoy, who do I enjoy doing it with, and like what really brings me happiness, and like exploring those things more.
So like in your 20s, would you say, because like, so you're trying to figure out what that happiness means now, but was there any points where you say you had thought you figured it out and then you realized, nope, that was not, I was chasing the wrong thing for happiness? Like, have you had any?
For sure, yeah, definitely. Like through like relationships and stuff, like I feel sometimes I've tried to be like a chameleon with other people, to try and like blend in and like please other people, to try and like be like, well, if they're happy, I'll of course be happy, you know, that kind of thing, instead of just staying true to myself. So I think if there's one thing I do need to work on and continue to grow with, it's like staying true to myself, and running with that idea.
Okay. Where do you like? Could you give like a little more? Like what's an example where you felt like you weren't being true to yourself, and you have to kind of recognize it and like come back? Is there like a small example you'd be comfortable sharing?
You know, I guess even like from a professional standpoint, right? Like, so now I work for myself, so I can not always, but can kind of configure my lifestyle to make it what I want it to be. Whereas before, like I've had jobs in the past that just like weren't great, toxic people, toxic environment. It just wasn't going to work. So I think like in that sense, like being able to recognize that and move on and then just find something that I want. Because now what I do, like with my job now, like the opportunity is endless. I can do whatever I want. I work for myself and I can kind of configure that. But like, I think professionally, sometimes like getting stuck in those positions, like where you just feel stuck and trapped, would potentially be an example of like for myself at least.
Okay. So like on a day-to-day basis, like nowadays, then, like what might be something that like you know triggers mental health for you, like, because I feel like the older I've gotten, the more I've figured out almost like the boundaries and the parameters I have to set in my life, so that I almost keep my mental health in check. Where like when I was young, I would do things that, whether I was subconsciously aware or eventually became consciously aware that it was actually affecting my mental health later on, I kept doing it. And now as I'm older, it's like I continue putting all these boundaries and parameters and barriers around my mental health, because all of a sudden it became such an important thing to protect.
Yeah.
Like how, you know, back when I was at 20, I remember I quit drinking for like a year while I was in college, and people thought it was crazy.
Right.
And people would try to be like, dude, just have a sip of beer. I'm like, nope. I just wanted the gain train to never stop. I wanted every single bit of muscle I could build to be built. And I remember I put all these boundaries and parameters to protect my muscle building, and it took me forever to realize that it was way more important to do that for mental health.
Sure.
So like, where does your mental health come in for you on a day-to-day? What kind of like little things do you feel like you've done to keep your mental health at bay?
So it's funny that you say that, like talking about like your training, right? I'm going to do all these things. Like whenever I do that, things regress for me mentally, physically, all these things. Like I'm very much an all-in or an all-out person. And if I'm all in, I've gone all in, my definition of all in, to powerlifting, where I've cut people out of my life, lost relationships, all these things because I'm like, I can't do this because this is what I want. Well, I usually end up regressing physically there and mentally. So like for me, it's finding that balance, right? But like my initial instinct when you asked the question was the first thing that popped in my head was social media. Anytime I feel like if I catch myself like just mindlessly scrolling, I'm like, okay, something's wrong. Like I got to go do something. And I've gotten better at, you know, I know Andrew Huberman talks like the staring at a screen type thing, just like refocus, stuff like that, get outside, go on a walk, just something like clear my mind, turn on a podcast, laugh a little bit, anything. But yeah, social media for me is like, that was the first thing that popped in my head is like, because I'll be looking at Instagram and I'm like, I don't even enjoy half these people, half these things. It's bringing me zero joy, but it's just all of a sudden I find myself just like every 10 minutes, like opening it, looking, just scrolling, not even enjoying it. And so that was the first thing that popped in my head with social media too. It's like trying to remove myself from that as much as possible. But obviously with like my business, I post on there a lot. So it's finding that balance.
So it's like, you keep hitting on a theme, which is like, you've been pretty good for most of your life about awareness.
Yeah, I would say I'm almost probably too aware of sometimes, unfortunately.
Like you get neurotic.
Overly
aware about stuff. Do you find like that's still a big issue? Like it's a big issue. I'm neurotic myself.
Sure.
I'm overly aware,
Yeah.
and it 100% is an issue. I've gotten better in my 20s and in my 30s now to like learn how to deal with it. Do you feel like you're learning that more and more?
Yeah, like more or less. I've learned how to use it probably to my advantage over the time,
Yes.
especially like from like a business aspect of like for sales and stuff, being aware of people's body language and all that stuff, but also like it can get bad too, right? Like, because I can be having a conversation with someone and start picking up on their body language and all this stuff, and then like I retreat because I'm like, ooh, they don't look like they're having this. Like sometimes I enjoy being able to read the room, and then sometimes I'm like, I wish I just had like an ounce of like that blind confidence where you can come in and call someone the wrong name and be like, oh yeah, it's whatever. Like that would like internally even just saying that makes me like exactly.
Oh, yeah.
So
I
like
hate
I
that.
am hyper aware to almost a fault. It does save me a lot, but at the same time, it's also really been tough on my mental health at times too.
So okay, I totally relate to that. So because when I almost deal with that in this way that like I'm so hyper aware that I feel like I'm trying to be too much of a chameleon around
Yeah,
people.
for sure.
And there's like a level that I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's bad
Yeah.
to be aware around people, but you're right. It can wear on your mental health where maybe sometimes you'll choose to not be around people when it might be good for you
Right.
to instead be by yourself. But so this awareness for you, that seems like it's always been there. Also, I think ties into what I said earlier that I want to touch on, which is you seem to also very much have an ingrained mentality of things can be better and things can improve.
Sure.
I just need to put the effort and work into it. You don't seem to be somebody who accepts this is the way it is and there's nothing you can do about it. That's it. Like I am this way. Like you're like I am this way, but I will.
Yeah.
Like there are things I can do to improve. So, do you feel like you know where that came from? Do you have any idea? Do you see that in your mom or your dad? Do you see that in your family in some way that you have that personality trait?
I don't really know where that came from. And maybe this sounds terrible. It's just like not having had a lot of self-esteem that I always felt like I could be better.
Were you a perfectionist when you were young?
I wouldn't say a perfectionist.
Okay.
With certain things, like I took like my training for soccer very serious. Like I trained my training for powerlifting is very serious. So like there's certain things I definitely hone in on that I would say I'm kind of a perfectionist, but far from at the same time. Yeah, I don't really know where that came from. I guess I've always just felt like there's more to me than what I'm able to give at moments. And it's just like, all right, how do I continue to push? It's like, one thing I really like about myself and I think is like an admirable trait is like, I'm the kind of guy, like I show up every day. Like I'm always going to be here. I'm not going to miss whatever. Like the alarm clock goes off, I get up and I go. No matter what. No matter if I don't want to go, no matter if I have to, I always show up. And I think that's something that like I've been able to instill in myself is just show up every day. Good things will happen, whether that's in the gym, whether that's in relationships, whether that's friendships, professionally, all that stuff. Like just show up every day. Good things will happen eventually. So I guess I've always just had that kind of mentality. And like kind of there's part of me that's always like, you're not good enough, keep going. You're not good enough, keep going. Whether that's right or wrong, I think that's kind of where that comes from.
So that the last point is separate. Okay, you had mentioned earlier, talk about with your dad, like he always showed up. He always showed up. So how much do you think that kind of relates to the fact like it sounds like maybe you did get that from him?
Yeah.
Because your dad seemed like he represented
Right.
the mentality of you show up no matter what.
For sure.
You're tired, you still show up because you said you'd be there. So you obviously got it from your dad
for
enough
sure,
there, and then have worked on it your own ways and have developed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that voice is it can get you so far in life, and it's almost like whenever I've wanted to be like motivational in the past, I realize all I'm really doing is telling people to have that voice that I have,
Right.
that I know you have, and it's really hard because if you don't have that voice, because motivation
Right.
fades and
Yeah, for sure.
it comes and goes and it can give you high,
100%.
but nothing matters if you're not consistent. And consistency, for you to be consistent, there has to be that voice that always just tells you like get a little bit better, always show up, and I don't like. How do you think you could teach that to somebody if they didn't already instinctually have it?
That's hard because it's like I always joke like with starting a business, people be like, oh, I'd love to start a business someday, blah, blah, blah. Like I always just joke whether it's right or wrong. Like I'm just too stupid not to. Like, why not? Like, I don't want to say I don't care, but like I was just the dumb one who did it and now it's worked out. It's like, I feel like everyone who has any I'm not the most skilled person, but I was just dumb enough to do it and then show up every day. You know, you touched on motivation too. Like, I know every day I'm not going to wake up motivated to do everything that I have to do, but I showed up. And so maybe some days I only can get in 6 good hours of work. I still showed up. It's better than none. Like, that's all it is. To teach that to someone, man, they just, like, you have to want it, I guess. You have to just, like, I'm routine oriented to a fault. But like, you just have to start that routine. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. It's like, all right, every day I just wake up at 6:30. Like, just start somewhere, right? And I think even by accident, something small like that, good things will happen. Because all of a sudden you're sitting there and you're like, well, I don't have to go to work for an hour and a half. What am I going to do? Well, there's at least an opportunity to start a good habit, right? There's an opportunity to go for a 10-minute walk in the morning or read a book or write or, you know, those are like the most common, like, self-improvement things. But it could just be like, hey, I get to relax in the morning, have a cup of coffee and just, you know, be at peace, watch the news. I think that would probably be somewhere to maybe start. But I don't know. I guess I'm one of the lucky ones who just, like, that's all I know.
Yeah, there's definitely a feeling of, like, lucky to it, that, like, that voice is there and I can't really help it. On my worst days when I don't even want the voice there, it's still there.
It's
and
always there.
It makes you not make bad decisions to some level. It kind of makes you, like, think about your decisions. So, like, for me, I've always, like, looked at it like, there's so many decisions I've made through my life have kind of compounded into, like, decisions that continually kept being good decisions overall. Have you felt that? Do you feel like from your early 20s into your late 20s into, like, where you are now, that, like, you only are where you are now because you've made some good decisions, or possibly the other way, like maybe you've made some bad decisions and those taught you so much?
For sure. I mean, I would say probably both, right? Like, you know, being young and being like, okay, like, I want to start a side hustle or whatever. Like, you know, and now all of a sudden that becomes a business. You know, just being committed to the gym, all of a sudden, you know, it starts at, you know, something small and now it becomes something, right? But then, like, also the bad is something you have to learn from too. You know, both professionally and relationships, all these things, you have to be able to, like, look at the bad, accept it, and then move forward. Like, something I've worked on is trying not to have, like, regrets. And I know it's super cliche, but it's like, accept it for what it is. It happened. The past is the past. You can just keep moving forward. And every day, just take, you know, one more step forward, accept it for what it is. It happened. It can't change it, and just keep moving forward. Learn from that lesson, and then just don't repeat it.
Would you say you've always been like that when it came to regrets?
No, God, no.
Like, so there's regrets that you had held on to and had to learn to let go of.
Yeah, that's something like it's probably been something more recently that I've really worked on, is just, like, letting go of those regrets and just, like, reflecting back and being like, okay, like, without these things happen, I'm not where I'm at now. I'm at peace where I'm at now. So, like, it is what it is. But no, that's something that, like, I've always struggled with. That's definitely, even, you know, like, reflecting back into high school, all these things, it was always like, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. And then, like, working myself up over it, where now it's just kind of like, all right, learn to accept it and move on. It doesn't happen instantly, and it's something that, again, if I don't continue to work on, we'll probably go backwards again, but, like, I'm at least recognizing it now, and I know going forward, I know I can work past it again, even if it does happen.
Do you feel like there's, like, some perfect state of mental health that you're like, looking to reach?
I would say no, because I would compare it to similar, like, all the other things we talked about, where, like, I always feel like there's, like, a next step. So, like, a next thing. And so, like, I guess mental health would be, like, the same way too. And maybe I just look at it that way because I feel like if I've hit places in my life where, like, I thought I, like, made it, or I thought I was there, like, this is it. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh no, like, you're still way down here. Like, there's all this to go. So, like, there's part of me that thinks that, like, there's always something better to be able to do. And maybe partially that's my motivation to keep doing it. And maybe, you know, somewhere in the middle there.
Okay. Would you say, like, what's, like, the darkest time you've probably been through? Like, where mental health was the worst and you had to, like, make it out of that hole?
A couple years back, I went through, like, a really dark stage. It's one of those things I've spent a lot of time thinking about, and I don't really know where it came from, what triggered it, or anything. Like, it played a big factor in a relationship, in professional life, in everything. And to this day, I still can't figure out what it was. I don't know if it was just kind of like one of those spells, I guess. I don't know. It was right around COVID. Like, life was changing at the time. Like, I just started working for myself. Like, there was a lot of life changes. I was like 26, 27. Like, I don't know. It must have just been like a weird age. I wish I had a better answer and be like, oh, it was this, that, or the other thing. I've still yet to be able to put my finger on what caused it. But yeah, I've definitely gone through that. But I wasn't prepared to pull myself out of it. So all I knew was to basically like internalize and self-destruct. Where like now I'm realizing like when I externalize things, like, and I get it out and I have conversations, even like this is like therapy for me, just like talking about it. So I'm realizing as a person, like I have to get it out, because when I internalize, like I just self-destruct and I like just kind of stay within myself, and it hurts everyone around me.
Yeah, it's like you try to be a lone wolf.
For sure.
When in reality, you need a community of guys to kind of almost talk to.
Chip on the shoulder type deal, like it's me against everyone, instead of like being like, hey, I got amazing people here who care about me, who want to see me succeed, like lean on them sometimes too.
So would you say you got out of that period almost just like you naturally over time, just time healed it? Or did you, because with you not necessarily knowing what got you there, I imagine it was hard for you to be like, well, there's this exact thing to fix and it's going to get me out of it. There wasn't that for you. So what did you do to kind of feel like you got out of it, and whether that was active or almost like an inactive thing you had to do to get out of it?
I mean, I guess at the time, like within my relationship, I had a partner who was able to be like, hey, like after the fact of some things happening, like, hey, like what happened to you? Like, look at these pictures. Like, I would go back and look at pictures. I didn't even look like myself. Like, I was just like dead inside. And I don't know what it was. But I guess like from there, I realized like I have to prioritize myself and like these things, because like without being able to do that, like it impacts every like facet of my life, mentally, physically, relationships, social, all these things. Like I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to like, I was so angry at the world. But it's taken me now almost 2 years later to finally like accept that, learn from it and grow from it. But it's been like, you know, I didn't know what to do at the time. And, you know, looking back now, I feel like I'm more confident to be like, okay, maybe it's time to get back in therapy, or, you know, take a medication or talk to someone, or like any of these things, call a friend, just like something. But at the time I didn't know what to do for sure.
Because like you wouldn't have necessarily just come to the gym and talk to Kirk about it, or if you would have, like, would you have just kind of talked about it surface level?
Yeah, very surface level. And that, you know, it's just, it would be more of like a surface level, and then I would like throw out like comments and hope that someone would just be like, hey, are you okay? Like one of those things, instead of just like going to a buddy and be like, hey, you want to go grab a drink? Like I just need to get something off my chest real quick. Where now I'm much more comfortable doing that, but at the time it wasn't. So it's kind of almost been like a 2-year journey to pull myself out of that part. But I was able to learn from it and grow from it. So it's kind of like I accept it for what it is.
Yeah, because to really like learn about mental health, and specifically your own mental health, you like have to go through some shit for some period of time.
Unfortunately,
it couldn't have just been bad and you took a pill and it fixed it.
Right.
Well, if that would have happened, you would have lacked some of the growth you have gone through now. Mm-hmm. And for men especially, I think you hear this like at the age of 25 is when like men's brains finally kind of stop maturing. So I take that when they say 25, that just means middle 20s. Mm-hmm. And I went through a period where like my anxiety got really bad in my middle 20s, and I kind of had, you know, stresses and things to explain it, but I couldn't explain how bad it got.
Yeah.
And there wasn't anything that really worked at the end of the day besides time and acceptance.
Yeah.
And you kind of described a similar situation, and it'll make me curious as I talk to more people how many guys almost kind of go through this in their 20s, because when our brain stops growing, we almost have to do this like acceptance. We have to do a survey of our life, a survey of reality around us, and either accept it or figure out how we want to move forward from it. And it's like such a pivotal time of growth for us from 25 to 30. Right. And I think a lot of guys go through that period very isolated. Yeah. And it can feel so lonely and isolated. And even if you make it out at the end of it positively, it didn't have to be that hard, or some of that growth could have even been better.
For sure.
And too many of us just don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And or we talk about it really surface level, and we never truly dig into it.
Yeah.
How would you say, like, having the powerlifting team here, the group of guys you got, you know, all with the same goal of wanting to get stronger and be bigger, like how does that camaraderie play into your mental health? How does it, like, is it like a stress reliever to have these days where you get together and everybody's shooting the shit, having some fun, Can you kind of talk about that? Like that?
Yeah. I mean, personally, I think it's good and bad. For myself, I think as a whole it's great and it's good for a lot of people. For myself, like I sometimes can get like uber competitive, where sometimes I almost need to like pull myself back and be like, I'm gonna go over here for a little bit, because otherwise like I almost start resenting people, because I just like, for better or worse, like I create these stories in my head. I'm like, all right, I gotta beat this person. It just is what it is. But like I'm a competitive person. It's what I'm passionate about, and like I don't want anyone to question me. It's just how it goes. But to know every Sunday morning when we train and you show up, like there's going to be a group of guys there. It's, for the most part, it's changed over the years, but there's still like a pretty core group of guys who show up every Sunday. Like there is something special about that, and I appreciate it. It's like still one of my favorite days and times of the week, which is funny because it's a Sunday morning and everyone seems to hate Sundays. But like show up every Sunday, we do the same thing, we have a good time. Yeah, I mean, I think that group mentality, especially in an individual sport, is super important, because like even when I reflect back, like when we had a really competitive group of really, really strong guys, like everyone was stupid strong. And we were doing things that like if someone told me the things I was doing then, like I'd ever do in my life, if you had told me that, you know, when I was 20, that at 26 I'd squat 800 or whatever, like I'd be like, there's no way, you know? So it's like, it is like, it does bring out the best in people, but I've also been on the other side where it can bring out the worst in myself, but that's also something that I have to work on personally too.
So it's funny because like both those aspects are things that I've kind of like, whether it's like heard in podcasts or read about lately. One of the first one being like this idea, if you take somebody and you have them do like an ISO hold that burns like a motherfucker, you know, they'll hit a minute doing it by themselves, and they can do a couple workouts and maybe they'll hit a minute 30 doing it by themselves. But you put them in a room full of 30 guys all doing that ISO, everybody's screaming. Yeah. They're gonna all of a sudden hold it for 3 minutes, because so much of it is like mind over matter to a limit. And I can 100% attest to the biggest gains in strength I had was when I trained with people stronger than me.
Yeah.
And my expectation of reality kept being raised that like, well, I should be able to do that. So then I would try things I couldn't, didn't think I could do.
Yeah, you would always take one more, right? Because it was just like, well, if they can do it, I can do it.
That is where the strength ends up being made. That's 100%. Where like the difference can really start to come down to. It's like, that's important. I think that's so important. Yeah. Guys need competitive nature, and then we need like this community aspect, because it can really change the way we process stuff.
100%, yeah.
On the other side of it, like the being overly competitive, I mean, there's definitely research that shows that like men need competitiveness, and like you need it and desire it to actually almost feel like a man. And like there's a lot like they show with children and play, and like we'll see in like chimpanzees, of like this idea of how males interact with each other, and competition is how we get along the most. Like this, you know, women will say men are never vulnerable, but like you take a bunch of guys on a football team that just lost a big game, watch them cry like babies on each other's shoulders and comfort each other, because men in competition is when we probably truly feel like we're the most vulnerable. But the other side of that is we can also get overly competitive because we do want to be better. And you're right, finding that balance is kind of I think finding that balance is where masculinity starts to like kind of, we can talk about this, right?
Definitely.
What is masculine? Well, masculine isn't just being the strongest, most physically impressive guy. Masculine is this like whole attitude that comes with it, and some of that develops from competition, but also while holding some humbleness about it. So that's kind of like, and it sounds like something you've very much experienced and have grown with here.
For sure. And it's funny because I'll say it. I've heard a lot of people say it on different podcasts, especially like strength ones. Like, I was my strongest probably like when my life was my darkest, like internally, which is always funny. But I know for myself, like I just like I said, I'm all in or all out, and I've been all in a lot, at least for what I would define all in. So then like I get frustrated that like no one's pushing me, because like I'm dedicating everything to this. Like I'm banged up, I'm still here. Like I want everyone to give that and like push me. So like I also know a lot of that is on myself and what I internalize, and not necessarily that like on the others, if that makes sense.
So prior to powerlifting, you obviously had some kind of competitive nature that in high school from soccer. Going into college and like losing, say, like you didn't play soccer in college, right? No. So like you lost that competitive aspect and being part of a team sport. And you know, obviously we talked about like you had anxiety come up in college and started seeing a therapist. But do you feel like, how did that develop through the rest of college till you graduated college and kind of got more serious into powerlifting, that you like built this other competitive sport to get into. What was that transition like between?
I guess like, so when I stopped playing soccer, like I felt like I should have had the opportunity to play in college. So I like, it was kind of like a bad breakup. Like I resented it and I'm like, I can't do this. Cause I didn't want to give myself that like hope of like, oh, maybe I'll just like try and walk on next year, all this stuff. So like I just totally went the other way. And I just happened to meet a guy my freshman year of college. He's like, hey man, you like lifting weights? You want to come train with me? He's like, I think I want to do this powerlifting thing. I got a buddy who does this. You want to try it? I'm like, yeah, sure. Because then there was part of me who was like, all right, I need to get like big and strong, so I never even think of the idea of playing soccer again. I'm like, if I get big, then I can't play soccer. So like I was just going the complete opposite way. So I started doing that, and then I just fell in love with it. I've always enjoyed weight training, even when I was younger. Like I would go to soccer practice and do soccer stuff, but I would go to the gym after and lift weights. But yeah, I just like totally flipped the script the opposite way, and then I was like, started doing an individual sport because I'm like, look, I can push myself as hard as I want. I don't have to depend on other people. Like, whatever the outcome is like on me. I don't have to depend on like a coach liking my style of play or who I am as a person dictating my success or where I go next. So it just kind of happened right away. Like I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. I wanted to stay active. I liked working out. Met a guy. Next thing you know, shortly after that, I meet Kirk, and here we are 10 years later. And yeah.
Was there like a mental health, like, it sounds like you didn't necessarily have like a mental health lull from like not having that competitive like thing till you got into powerlifting officially. Like you just, that transition, there was probably a lot going on in life.
For sure, yeah. I mean, I think I was so busy with like such a lifestyle change with like college and relationships and friendships and all these things. Like there was just so much going on that like it allowed me not to become preoccupied with it. But like I said, there was a part of me that took it like a breakup where it's like I resented it. I didn't want to watch it. I didn't want to be around it. I didn't want to play it. Like I didn't want that popping back in my head like, all right, I still got it. Like we should try and figure out how to do this. So it was like, nope, draw a line in the sand. Like it's done. I have to move on and go from there.
As you've gone through this journey and continued like learn more and more about your mental health, do you find that you view others differently, or like you'll notice other people's mental health issues more, or like notice when somebody else is likely hiding mental health issues?
Ooh. Yeah, I mean, but I think a lot of that comes back to being like overly aware more than anything.
Because you're picking up their body language, you're picking up their tone.
And so like I can pick up on their body language, their tone, like you said, all those kinds of things, and be like, oh, I know that feeling. Like I've looked like that before, I've done that before, I've said that before. So then yeah, I feel like because of that and my experiences individually, like I can pick up on it pretty quick.
How would you define masculinity by your own terms, where you are in life now?
Man, that's really tough. I've honestly never even thought about it. To me, I think masculinity, being a man, is being both like physically and emotionally available and vulnerable. Being able to be a protector and a provider on one end, but also being able to be compassionate, loving, and expressing of their emotions on the other. Being able to be true to yourself and open up in all walks of life. And just being as confident in yourself and like your center as you can be.
Yeah, and I mean that's a great way to kind of define it. I think that hits a lot of like the main points I think of what masculinity is. And obviously, like masculinity isn't necessarily male or female necessarily. Right. You could be a female and have masculine energy, and a male with masculine, female feminine energy. How do you find that have you found that you've had to balance having that like some level of feminine energy with masculine energy in your life?
Yeah,
and talk about that.
It's been like a struggle for sure, because like as I mentioned earlier, like I sometimes struggle with being like affectionate or vulnerable and like talking about my emotions. It's a very new thing for me that I'm working on developing, growing into. But yeah, no, that's definitely been a struggle of mine throughout my whole life, is being able to just be like vulnerable with someone.
Yeah, vulnerability is it's
scary.
One.
Yeah, it's scary.
But the older I get, the more I see the need to not be vulnerable. Like the need to be vulnerable is, and how important it actually is. And especially with guy friends, and the fact that how often we feel shit that we relate on that like if we just were vulnerable about it, we'd be like, oh wait, you're going through that too, or you just went through that last year and can give me some advice that you know how you handled it. That I think that's just so important.
Right.
Yeah, I had a question there. I wanted to tangent off of that. Would you say like you saw your parents play like a masculine and a feminine role growing up that really separated that?
Yeah, I mean, I think my parents were very traditional in that aspect. My dad went to work every day, all that kind of stuff. That my mom stayed at home with my sister and I, so it was very traditional, like stay at home, make meals, clean the house, do the laundry, take care of the kids, that kind of thing. So there's definitely that like traditional like male role, female role, and not much in between.
And your mom, like you said, both your sides of your family are not overly emotionally like vulnerable people or like very big huggers, but you probably like, did you still see your mom be more emotionally vulnerable than your dad?
Yeah, I mean more probably for sure, yeah, but probably more in that traditional like feminine way.
Yeah. Do you like, you and your sister are only 2 years apart?
Yep.
Right. So
yep.
How do you see like your sister like and how she's grown up compared to you? Do you kind of see any differences?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we're very different in a lot of ways. She's much more like stern and to the point. I don't mean this in a bad way, maybe like a little more heartless.
Yeah.
She's not afraid to like hurt someone's feelings if she has to and say it. Whereas like I would always consider what someone sitting on the other side from me would have to say or think about me. Not that she doesn't care, but she's way more, she has that ability to just be more straightforward than I am.
So are you like, you kind of like you're a little more empathetic?
Yes, for sure.
You kind of you can see somebody, because you're so aware, you'll see somebody else's reaction. You can like almost imagine in your own head what they're feeling in that moment. She's
definitely more like tough in that aspect compared to myself.
Okay. So kind of like wrap it up. Is there any recommendations or things that you would say to your younger self in your early 20s that you'd also, you know, you'd say to other guys struggling with mental health or going through a journey?
Yeah. I mean, I think it would just be like, try to be as open and honest with yourself as you can be. And, you know, just kind of like go with what your heart and your gut say. Like if you like something, don't be afraid to admit it. Try it. Try everything. You know, don't be afraid to do something just because you're afraid someone else will judge you for it. You know, take a risk, take a chance, just be open. You know, if you enjoy being with someone, tell them you enjoy being with them. If you don't, get out of there. You know, just be open and work on that every day.
That's the advice that I think a lot of people could really.
It's a small, easy thing to work on, but it can work. You know, go leaps and bounds for you.
It's like the idea of the simplest things really do get you the furthest. Right. How even like in fitness, sleep, eat, and exercise take you further than
trump anything. Yeah.
Well, above anything else. That like that it comes down to the simplest things that we all have to just work on, and most of us are very caught up in life to like even work on those. And
for sure,
awareness is such a big part of them, and finding that limit of it.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you being on the podcast here. This was great, and
it was awesome.
Very fun conversation, and I'm hoping people will watch this and
me too.
You know, like continue to see more and more that like so many guys are going through the same thing 100%. And are literally just learning things. We're all like learning things in parallel on our own, and we could all be accelerating this learning if we're all learning together. And these conversations, it's amazing. Sometimes talking to people how like. As I'm talking to you, I'm like more links are being filled in my head.
For sure.
As you're talking, you can like continue to fill more links. So this has been great. I appreciate it. And
for sure.
Maybe we'll have to do another one in the future.
Of course,
again.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, thank you guys for tuning in today. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe, and thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
Awesome.